if you grew up in the UK in the late 70s, early 80s, you're in that special group of people that are late Gen Xers, early millennials, and you probably grew up on a diet of Enid Blyton, Blue Peter, and all of those other shows and stories that emphasized traveling around the world and having fun, making adventure wherever you went and exploring the world. You probably also grew up with the idea that the world was open to everybody and for exploring and for making the world a better place rather than the tightening borders that we see today. And as a consequence, I grew up with this vision of driving around the world, of traveling around the world. I always wanted to jump on a motorbike and go round the world and see what I could see along the way. These days, though, as a person in the LGBT community, with many countries closing their borders to people like me, it's no longer safe or practical for me to do so. And that's meant that I have started to live vicariously through people online who are making those adventures. I'm watching them and I'm enjoying their adventures as they go. And one person who is very dear to my heart is the wonderful Louis Cole over on the FunForLouis channel. Louis is just a little bit younger than me, grew up, I'm sure, on the same kind of diet of adventure and wonder that was available in the 80s and 90s as young people. And Louis has an amazing list of accomplishments to his name. He's worked with kids in inner city London and helped build a party bus, and he had his own DJ set up on the bus. He's flown around the world in an airplane with a group of friends, and most recently he's converted a iconic Volkswagen Microbus to electric and then decided to drive it from LA to New York in time for the Christmas holidays last year. I should point out that this bus was not professionally converted. It was done by Louis on a budget using repurposed parts from other vehicles. It didn't have rapid charging, and instead of me and many of you watching who would just jump in the car and go on a long distance trip and find a rapid charger, stop for 30 minutes and then get on your merry way, Louis did it all with a slow charger, like 6-7 kilowatts maximum power. And yet his adventure from coast to coast has been one of my most enjoyable binge watching experiences of the last couple of months. It is wonderful to have Louis here today to chat about his adventure and what comes next, which is truly amazing. Louis, thank you for spending some time with me. I think you're in the UK right now?
I am, yeah. I'm in Brighton. Just moved here this month, so I'm not going to be travelling as much over the coming months because my wife Raya is pregnant and we're expecting our first baby in April. So we're kind of nesting right now.
It is exciting to see. I've been following your announcement. I know that you and Raya have already done plenty of amazing adventures together around the world. Tell me about your adventures thus far. I know that I remember seeing you, I think you were on Blue Peter like many, many years ago. Or was it some other TV channel?
Well, there was a show that Diane Louise Jordan, who was one of the Blue Peter presenters, she had another show called Bright Sparks on the BBC, and I was on that, but I was only like 14, so we're talking like 26 years ago almost. 24 years ago.
It was the 90s at the time. It was something to
I can't
do
believe
with
you remember that.
It was something to do with a jungle. Like, did you have a jungle room or something?
I did, yeah.
Which is kind of
Did
bonkers.
you see that? Did you see
I
that?
I did. I remember seeing that. It took me many, many years to put two and two together.
Wow.
But you've traveled around the world. You've done a lot of outreach work and a lot of community work. You had a double-decker bus for many years. You had several double-decker buses in the UK, which are kind of very quintessentially British. And you did very unquintessentially British things with them. But then you got into electric vehicles. And I think the last time I saw you was at CES in 2020 at the Impossible Burger stand of all things. And I think about that time you were starting to think about electric vehicles and converting electric cars or an electric van. and making a trip. And I remember exchanging some emails with you about possible people who could help you do that. And you ended up going to work with the lovely Yahoo, who also has a lovely, amazing YouTube channel. And he helped guide you along your own conversion path.
Yeah, Jehu was an amazing mentor and very patient with me as I literally was... I had my van in his workshop for probably 6 months. It was a while before we got started. And then, end of 2020, we started the project. And he had it on his lift. And I was working underneath it, for like 3 months solid. So he was incredibly generous.
He's a lovely guy.
He was just helping me. He was just helping me out, and he was like coaching me through it. He made sure I did 99% of the work myself. He was obviously helping me and giving me advice, but I was doing all the hands-on stuff, often having to ask him for help and advise me on how to do things because it was all a very new process for me. But absolutely amazing. I was in shock when it actually worked after we finished it, and it drove, and I was like, I can't believe this is actually working. This is like a miracle.
I mean, Yehu's been working on buses for years, and that's kind of how I know him, through his work with the microbuses that he converted, and obviously the DIY power walls that he still does today. We'll put a link down to his channel in the description. And I'm really glad that you were able to utilize his knowledge, because I think one of the things that we want to focus on here at the channel is the idea that you don't have to buy a brand new electric vehicle to drive electric. You can actually take and repurpose, upcycle a car that's had a very useful life and give it a new lease of life by putting an electric drivetrain in it. And that's kind of I would say it's very near and dear to what you've done throughout your career so far.
I agree. I like doing things a bit differently, and I'm a big fan of like vintage vehicles and like how much character they have. And I think that can be lost a little bit with modern cars, although you do get a lot of benefits like, heating and the computerized element of it all. But I think there's something fun about taking an old car that, my van, the engine had broken, it wasn't working. So I don't know. I do like this idea of bringing something back to life and improving it, making it even better.
So you put an electric motor in, a fairly standard retrofit for any Volkswagen that's been converted to electric. You got batteries from old Teslas, right?
Yeah, I found Jehu found on eBay this guy who was selling a whole Tesla pack, like 14 modules, and I managed to get it for $10,000, which I think was a pretty good deal because I was seeing a lot of the Tesla batteries now are selling for over $1,000 a module, maybe like $1,200, $1,400 So we got a good deal on that. And then I had to, the painstaking bit was custom building these aluminum or aluminium boxes to put the batteries in and bolt them in and attach all of that to the chassis under the bus. That was the most time consuming, painstaking part of the project.
Well, you did a good job because, and I don't want to spoil the last episode of the series thus far, but as we discover in the last episode of this particular chapter of the adventure, you made them so well, you made them a bit difficult to get into. But let's not dwell on that. So you decided, tell me about the decision to go from LA to New York in time for the holidays, because that's a long way. And I think as a Brit, I grew up with the idea that driving from Norwich to London was like a day trip. Like you'd take all day, you'd go to London and then you'd go home, and wow, that was a long way. Now I live here in the States. The idea of going to see friends who are a couple of 100 miles away, that's an afternoon trip. So how did that square in your head when you're like, okay, let's put this bus and drive it all the way from LA to New York without any rapid charging capabilities?
Yeah, well, I knew because I was in LA for like 2.5 years, and then me and my wife took our school bus and we drove it around the States. So I already had driven LA to New York, then back down to Austin, Texas, and then we drove all the way down to Costa Rica. So I've done a lot of driving the last year or two. So we'd done it in the big school bus, and then my Volkswagen bus was still in LA, but I wasn't there. So I was like, well, I'm not just going to leave it there. And then originally, and I'm debating whether to even do this now, but originally I was like, well, let's get it to the East Coast, ship it over to the UK. I've since found out it's going to be almost impossible to get it legally registered to be on the road in the UK because there's a lot more. Well, apparently this is what a friend of mine I'm talking to is saying. They're way more stringent on the conversion process, and you have to have a lot of stuff signed off, and they're saying my van would never pass any of that. So I mean, it's fine, but I think that was the original plan. So I was like, well, let's get it to the East Coast. I had limited time, and we were going to be in New York anyway for Christmas. So I saw this window, and I'm always up for an adventure as well. And so originally I'd been so ambitious. I thought, well, why don't I try and get a massive solar array and solar charge it to get it across the country? I'm very glad that didn't pan out this time of year, because maybe the first 4 days I would have maybe had enough sun, and then it was just cloudy the rest of the trip. So it really wouldn't have worked. But I do still want to do that, and we can talk about this in a bit, but that's the next phase of
absolutely.
The project is to get us probably a trailer full of lightweight solar panels and create this huge solar array of maybe 15 kilowatt solar array, and charge the bus without having to go to all of these chargers, and probably plug the solar straight into the battery pack.
So you had some pretty interesting adventures on your trip. So early on in the trip, you had a little bit of technical difficulties, but once you got underway, you took the southern route. So you went from LA across, I kind of say up the hill, I guess, towards Arizona. And then you drove through Arizona, and then kind of through southern Arizona. And then you ended up in Texas. And I don't know, You've been to El Paso before this trip, or was this your first time to El Paso? Because I've been to El Paso once, and I was very interested to see your reaction to El Paso was very similar to my reaction to El Paso. Yeah,
I mean, I couldn't believe... I think I have driven through before, but the road I came in on, the main highway, it was kind of mad how close. It really does straddle across the Mexican border straight into Juarez, so it's like this crazy contrast between the US side and the Mexico side, but it's almost mushed together as one city.
Yeah.
But they look completely different. It's almost like you're looking across into this completely different housing and kind of shanty town, and you look like you're in rural Mexico, and then it's like a more developed US. I don't know, it was just really amazing to me to see that. And I think that was something I felt the whole trip was it was just beautiful seeing parts of the US that I hadn't got to slow down and discover before, because I've done that cross-country road trip a few times, but it's always so fast-paced, and I'm not often stopping in the way I was on this trip because I had to charge, because I only had like 150 miles max range.
It was interesting to see how your plan was very different, I think, to how a lot of people would have done it. Instead of relying on public charging infrastructure, which is kind of the first thing you think of when you're like, I'm going to drive an electric car across country, you actually relied almost exclusively on RV parks and campsites, to those who are watching in the UK. And that was a very different experience for you, because you'd get up late, you'd drive until your battery was nearly empty, then you'd find an RV park, you'd park up and you'd plug in. And then sometimes you'd be leaving again at like 6, 7, 8 in the evening and driving another 100 miles for that day. In the middle of the trip, kind of after you'd got to Texas and you were driving slowly north, you actually covered a fairly decent amount of mileage most days, like 200 miles, just using this technique. How did you come up with that idea as opposed to using like an official public charging station somewhere?
In San Diego, there's an EV company or an EV shop, and they do tons of cool conversions called EV West.
I know them well.
From what I understood is they had lent one of their VW buses, electric conversion buses, to a guy. I think his name Jack Smith. Okay, so Jack. Someone had put me in touch with him and said, hey, you need to chat to Jack because he had done this trip as a tribute to the first, his is called an electric tribute to the America's first road trip on the Lincoln Highway. So he had gone from San Francisco to New York earlier in the year, or it might have been the year before. Anyway, so he had done this trip on a similar slow charging. I don't know if I think he had a similar charging rate to me, but I think he'd done a lot more planning ahead, and they'd booked different RV parks, and they did it also a different time of year, like I think spring, summertime. But he gave me a ton of advice, and one of the early bits of advice I'm so thankful he gave me was, hey, look, the RV parks have these 50 amp connections, hookups. Plus you can park up, you're in a nice, lovely RV park, you've got showers, toilets, you're not like charging in some random parking lot. Which I did a tiny bit, but yeah, like you said, 90% of my charges were in RV parks, and then occasionally I couldn't find an RV park and had to try and rely on some of the charging networks. But I don't think I could have done it without the RV parks, because a lot of these networks weren't very accurate, and I might show up at a charger and it's either not available, or it's on private property and you can't actually even get to it, or some of them were even slower. So I think some of them were only like a 5 kilowatt charge, or even the ones at 6 kilowatts still weren't enough to give me my 3 charges, which was at like 7.5 kilowatts. So anyway, yeah, there was lots of, it was a steep learning curve. Let me put it like that. There's a steep learning curve. The first 3-4 days, and then I really found my kind of groove after that. But yeah, thanks a lot to Jack for helping me out. And he also we stayed in touch through the rest of the trip, and I was messaging him, asking for advice. The 3 people that really helped me the most on this trip were Jack, Jay, who I kept on messaging when I had little problems. He'd help me problem solve. And then there's this guy, Brett, at Solar Roller, who is currently got the bus.
Right.
So he was, and again, like if you haven't seen the series, I won't say any more than that, but he's going to help me get kit it out so it's fully solar powered, and he's done a few.
That's going to be incredible.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing, and he's already done a few of these vehicles, so it's very doable.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's done it to the scale we want to do that amount of solar charging before. So
I mean,
we'll see how it goes.
It's going to be incredible to see. I cannot wait to see that conversion. And as you said, that's kind of where we were left off. Unfortunately, you didn't make it to New York in the bus because of weather. And, I don't think anybody can criticize you for that. We had the worst Christmas storm I think we've had in living memory for most Americans.
Yeah.
Here in Portland, Oregon, we had ice rain. There was, I think on one particular day, we had 3-4 inches of ice build up on our driveway, on our vehicles. My partner had to drive all the way down to Sacramento to pick up her parents for the holidays, who'd got stranded there after trying to fly in from Missouri. It was a horrible couple of days before Christmas. So I'm glad you were able to successfully make it to be with your family, even though the bus didn't. I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil the rest of the trip. But I do want to say, you unfortunately, Raya didn't come with you, but you did have another family member, very important family member, traveling with you on the trip.
I did, yeah. Raya was not really down for this adventure, and I'm very glad she didn't come because it would not have been enjoyable. It's pretty hardcore. The main thing was there was no heating in the van. That was probably one of the hardest elements of it. So, but anyway, we brought our newly adopted pet dog. She's basically a puppy, Callie, who's here sitting next to me. Well, she's kind of cuddled up under the blanket. Callie?
She made it to the UK. That's fantastic.
Yeah, she made it all the way here. So she was patiently sitting in the van with me the whole time, probably bewildered by what on earth we were doing. But we did, like a solid 17, 18 days in the van. It started not much nicer for her in California, and then it just got colder and colder. But I had her wrapped. She had her little coat on, and then I had these little like booties, these little boots for her. And then we also got an electric blanket to keep her warm.
I think Cali is probably one of the most traveled dogs in the world right now.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad she was able to join me and keep me company. It was when things were tough, she kept my spirits high for sure.
Yeah, it was very special watching that particular relationship and how you kept each other going and explored. And she saw snow for the first time, and her reaction was particularly priceless. So, obviously, you're going to be a father soon, and that's a very different change to your life. A lot of the things you've done earlier on in your career were about experiencing the world and about traveling and trying to be as ethical and as responsible a traveler and a human being as possible. You're now at a point where, you know, you've got a new life coming into the world that you're going to be responsible for. What does traveling look like now there's more than just the three of you?
Well, we're obviously going to figure that all out. So yeah, we're not committing to any big trips this year. I think definitely our home base is going to be in the UK. We did bigger picture. We have bought land in Costa Rica, and we drove our school bus down there last year, and we're looking to build a beautiful jungle house in this amazing kind of eco community that we've bought land in. So it's just like this village called Alegria. Amazing people. We're so looking forward to it, but it just wasn't quite ready to provide a home for us during this kind of first experience of stepping into parenthood. You know, Raya, the medical care she'll need, just like, you know, all of that stuff. I just feel like maybe our next kid we might have in Costa Rica, but we thought being back in the UK with my parents and my family around, we've got a ton of friends that are all in that same stage of life, having babies. And so I'm excited. I think it's a whole new adventure. Yeah, we're not going to be traveling as much this year, but I think I'm just as excited as any of the mad adventures I've been on, because although having kids is like a normal part of life that most humans experience, it is crazy. Like I still can't quite believe it's even happening, and I'm sure, you know, everything I hear is just it's going to change our lives. So
yes, it will definitely. Yeah. And I say that as someone who has gone through the parental process and has now come out the other side. Louis, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Remind people where they can watch the series and where they can keep up to date with what you're doing now.
Yeah, so it's all on my YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/Louis, Louis. And check me out on Instagram, Louis Cole. And we're also going to be documenting a lot of our experience, kind of stepping into parenthood, our adventure as a family on our couples channel, which is Raya and Louis. And the next EV project I'm sure your audience will be interested in is I'm going to try, again, this is still an idea in the works, but I'm going to try whilst I'm here in the UK to do an EV conversion on a classic Beetle, a bug,
nice.
a VW bug.
Nice.
So, I think that would be cool. And I've just been emailing a guy. I think I'm going to get a little bit more training just to get my kind of safety approach up to scratch, because someone pointed out, you know, I'm making these videos, I've got a big audience following them, and I don't want to endanger people's lives by because I think the first van build I did, it did get a bit crazy. I mean, I don't think I was close to like giving myself a shock, but I wasn't being the safest with my power tools and stuff like that. So I think as I get more into these DIY projects and learning stuff, I do want to do it in a safe, responsible way. Even if it's still a little bit crazy, I definitely want to be more responsible. So I think that's the next step. And hopefully, in the next few months, I'll get really going on that conversion, and then I'll have an electric Beetle to drive around in the UK.
Fantastic. I'm sure you, the baby, Rhea, and also, of course, Callie will have absolute fun doing that. For some reason, I can also envisage you with an electric cargo bike, you know, with a little baby bassinet in the front. I think that would be just the best for around Brighton. I think that would be that'd be pretty special.
I think there'll be many electric vehicles. Yeah. What someone suggested I should convert an vintage Vespa and have like a sidecar. You know, like the motorbikes with the sidecar. But yeah, we'll figure out something. We'll definitely have a few little electric vehicles.
Louis, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Nikki.
And thank you at home for watching. We are done with today's video. Do make sure that you click below and follow the links to watch Louis' fun series over on the FunForLouis channel. If you liked today's video, you know what to do, and feel free to tip us with a super thanks. The comments are open for your thoughts, as is our Discord chat room. Links are below. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links to regularly support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store. And check us out on Mastodon. We now have our very own server. Scrolling on my right is the list of amazing charged up supporters, and shout outs go out to our self-driving tier of supporters. They are Mike Weeder, Linda Irish, Sean Tucker, Patrick Boyarski, Paul Nelson, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Michael Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Mura Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tazla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Carl Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenta, and Jim Burness. Finally, out of this world thanks to our top tier supporters: Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Burrowbridge, David Kitchen, Aaron Hahn, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylin, and Ian. I'll be back soon with more awesome content, as will the rest of the team. But until then, keep evolving.